The sky was not blue, but a bruised, sickly violet that suggested the atmosphere was trying to kill him. For Elias Thorne, that suggestion had become a certainty. The readout on his wrist display blinked a lethargic crimson, warning him that his oxygen scrubbers were operating at 4% efficiency. It was day 6. The island was a blackened scar on the face of the planet, a jagged expanse of volcanic glass and ash that stretched toward a horizon obscured by toxic haze. There were no birds here. There were no insects. There was only the wind, which sounded less like a breeze and more like a low, mournful scream trapped in a canyon. Elias dragged his left boot forward, catching the toe on a ridge of obsidian. He stumbled, his knees impacting the hard ground with a jar that rattled his teeth. He did not have the strength to get up immediately. He lay there, listening to the rasp of his own breathing inside the helmet. It sounded wet, heavy, like a bellows filled with sand. 6 days ago, the atmospheric braking thrusters on his shuttle had failed. He had ejected, watching his ship turn into a streak of fire that disintegrated over the ocean. He had landed here, on this dead rock, with a survival pack that was half empty and a suit designed for orbital repair, not planetary trekking. He had walked in circles, then in straight lines, hoping for a coast, a signal, a miracle. He had found only ash. He pushed himself up. His vision swam, the edges of his sight darkening as the carbon dioxide levels in his suit crept higher. He needed to find shelter before the sun reached its zenith. The heat here did not just warm you, it cooked you inside your armor. Then he saw it. It was not a hallucination, though his oxygen-starved brain tried to categorize it as one. A distortion rippled through the air 100 yards ahead, like a heat shimmer, but structured. The light bent, twisted, and then snapped back into place, revealing a vessel. It was sleek, shaped like a teardrop of polished silver chrome, hovering silently 3 feet above the jagged rocks. It had no markings, no seams, no thrusters that Elias could identify. It was beautiful, and it was undeniably alien. Elias tried to shout, but his throat was too dry, his tongue a swollen piece of leather. He waved an arm, a clumsy, desperate motion. The vessel rotated, facing him. A ramp descended from the underside with a hiss of equalizing pressure. A figure stepped out. She was tall, encased in armor that looked less like metal and more like hardened, woven light. The plates shifted with her movement, glowing with a faint, pulsing luminescence. She removed her helmet, and Elias felt the world tilt on its axis. Her skin was the color of pale lavender, smooth and flawless against the harsh backdrop of the volcanic rock. Her hair was a cascade of liquid silver, falling loose around a face that possessed an angular, predatory beauty. But it was her eyes that held him. They were large, lacking whites, filled instead with a swirling, bioluminescent blue nebula that seemed to rotate as she looked at him. She did not look like a rescuer. She looked like a Valkyrie sent to confirm a kill. Elias took 1 step toward her. His knees buckled, and the darkness finally rushed in to claim him. Consciousness returned not with a snap, but with a slow, rhythmic thrumming sound. Elias opened his eyes. Above him was a curved ceiling of matte white metal, soft ambient light glowing from hidden recesses. He was not in his suit. He was lying on a table that felt warm against his back, dressed only in his undershirt and trousers. He sat up, gasping. The air here smelled rich, saturated with oxygen and a scent that reminded him of ozone and crushed flowers. He checked his arms and legs. No pain. The crushing fatigue that had weighed on him for 6 days was gone, replaced by a strange, buzzing energy. "You are awake." The voice was melodic but held an edge of steel. Elias spun around, The woman stood by a console near the wall. Without the helmet, she was even more imposing. She wore a bodysuit of dark gray material beneath the armor plates on her shoulders and shins. Those nebula eyes watched him with a mixture of curiosity and clinical detachment. "Where am I?" Elias asked. His voice was raspy but functional. "On my ship," she said. She tapped the console, and a holographic display vanished. "I stabilized your vital signs. Your lungs were suffering from severe particulate damage and oxygen deprivation. I repaired the tissue." "Repaired?" Elias slid off the table. His legs felt steady. "You're a doctor?" She hesitated. It was a micro-expression, a flicker of uncertainty that vanished instantly behind a mask of indifference. "I am a traveler, a scavenger. My medical unit is automated." Elias looked around the cabin. The technology was seamless. There were no wires, no bolts, no visible control sticks. The surfaces hummed with power. "This is a hell of a rig for a scavenger," he said. "I've flown Earth Alliance prototypes, and I've seen deep space haulers. I've never seen anything like this. The galaxy is vast, human," she said. "You have seen very little of it." She walked toward him, and he instinctively stepped back. She was taller than him by 2 inches, her presence radiating a natural authority that contradicted her claim of being a simple drifter. She stopped a few feet away, scanning him with a handheld device that emitted a soft trill. "Who are you?" Elias asked. "I owe you my life. I'd like to know the name of the person who saved me." She lowered the device. "I am Sayalari." "Just Sayalari?" "Just Sayalari," she repeated. "And you are Elias Thorne. Your identification tags were primitive, but readable." "Primitive," Elias echoed, a dry smile touching his lips. "Well, thanks for lowering yourself to help a primitive." Sayalari stiffened. For a second, he thought he had offended her. Her chin rose slightly, a gesture of aristocratic defiance that seemed ingrained in her muscle memory. "I did not lower myself. It is basic decency to preserve life when possible." "Right," Elias said. He walked to the viewport. Outside, the dead island stretched endlessly. "So, Sayalari the scavenger, what are you doing on a rock like this? There's nothing here but glass and sulfur." Sayalari joined him at the window, keeping a deliberate distance. "Scanners picked up energy signatures, old signatures. I thought there might be wreckage worth salvaging. Instead, I found you." "Lucky me," Elias said. He looked at her reflection in the glass. "Does your ship have a transmitter? Can you get me to a comms buoy? The Alliance has a patrol route 3 sectors over." Sayalari turned away from the window, her face unreadable. "My long-range communications array is damaged. I cannot send a signal that far, and we cannot leave just yet." "Why not?" "The storm cycle on this planet is erratic. The atmosphere is ionizing. If we try to break orbit now, the feedback loop will fry my navigation systems, and we are grounded until the cycle passes." Elias looked back at the desolate landscape. "How long? 2 days? Perhaps 3? 3 more days. But at least he had air. At least he wasn't alone." He looked at Sayalari, studying the strange markings on her armor, the intricate silver embroidery on the collar of her bodysuit. It looked hand-stitched, impossibly detailed. "You talk like a diplomat," Elias noted. "And you dress like a royal guard, but you say you're a scavenger." Sayalari's eyes narrowed. "Dialects vary. Elias, do not presume to understand my culture based on your limited exposure." She turned and walked toward the cockpit, her movements fluid and silent. "Come. We need to assess the exterior. If we are stuck here, We should see if those energy signatures I detected are accessible. If there is salvage, I intend to claim it. Elias followed her, grabbing his repaired suit from a rack near the door. He didn't buy her story. Not for a second. Scavengers didn't speak with perfect diction, and they certainly didn't heal strangers for free. But she had saved him, and in a world this dead, beggars couldn't be choosers. The air outside was cooler now, but the wind had picked up, whipping grains of black sand against their visors. Elias walked beside Sayalari, checking his wrist computer. His oxygen levels were holding steady at 100%. "The signal is weak," Sayalari said over the comms link. Her voice was clear in his ear, devoid of static. "It is emanating from a subterranean source 3 kilometers north." "That's the volcanic ridge," Elias said, pointing to a jagged spine of rock in the distance. "It's unstable territory. If there's a cave-in, we're buried." "My sensors indicate the structure is reinforced," Sayalari replied. "It is artificial." "Artificial? You mean ruins?" "Perhaps." They moved in silence for a while. Elias watched her traverse the terrain. She didn't just walk, she flowed. When she stepped on loose shale, she adjusted her weight instantly, never losing balance. It was a trained movement, combat movement. "You handle yourself well," Elias said. "Military background?" "Survival background," she corrected sharply. "In the outer rim, you learn to move or you die." "Fair enough. Where are you from? The Trinary Worlds?" He saw her stumble. It was slight, barely a hitch in her stride, but he caught it. "No," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I have never been to the Trinary Worlds." "I heard it's nice this time of year," Elias pressed, testing her. "If you like totalitarian regimes and plasma bombardments." Sayalari stopped. She turned to face him, the bioluminescence in her eyes flaring brighter. "The politics of empires are not the concern of scavengers. Elias, we survive on what falls through the cracks. Do not interrogate me." "I'm just making conversation," Elias said, holding up his hands. 6 days alone makes a guy talkative." She held his gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the path. "Talk less. Walk more." As they climbed the ridge, the landscape became even more alien. Twisted formations of solidified lava rose like grasping hands from the ground. The sand here was purple-black, shifting under their feet like crude oil. "Hold," Sayalari said suddenly. She raised a gauntleted hand. "What is it?" "Seismic vibration. Deep." She tapped the side of her helmet. "Something is active down there. A generator. Or a beacon." "Could be a distress signal," Elias suggested. "Maybe someone else crashed here." "Or a trap," Sayalari murmured. The wind began to howl, a banshee shriek that tore at their suits. The sky above darkened rapidly, the bruised violet turning to a suffocating charcoal gray. Lightning arced across the clouds, silent and green. "Storm!" Elias yelled over the comms. "A big one! We need cover!" Sayalari scanned the horizon. "The ship is too far and we cannot make it back. There," Elias pointed. "That outcropping. It looks like an entrance." They ran. The wind hit them with the force of a physical blow, threatening to knock them off the ridge. Sayalari moved ahead, her armor glowing fiercely in the gloom, a beacon for him to follow. Elias pushed his legs, his muscles burning. The sand whipped up into a frenzy, blinding him. He felt a hand grab his harness. Sayalari hauled him forward with strength that was impossible for her slender frame. She threw him into the lee of a massive slab of rock. Behind it was a fissure, a crack in the mountain that opened into a dark maw. "Inside," she ordered. They scrambled into the opening just as the storm slammed into the mountain. The sound was deafening. a roar of thunder and wind that vibrated through the stone floor. Inside, the air was still and frigid. Elias engaged his suit lights, cutting a beam through the darkness. They were in a tunnel, the walls smooth and metallic, clearly not natural. "You were right," Elias breathed. "It is artificial." Sailari didn't answer. She was leaning against the wall, her breathing heavy over the comms. She slid down to a sitting position, hugging her knees to her chest. "Sailari?" Elias knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" "The cold," she whispered. "My species. We do not retain heat well. The atmospheric drop outside. It drained my suit's thermal reserves." Elias checked her suit telemetry, which she had synced to as earlier. Her core temperature was dropping rapidly. "You're hypothermic." "I will recover," she said through chattering teeth. "I just need a moment." "We don't have a moment. If you drop too low, you'll go into shock." Elias looked around. The tunnel was dead. There was no power, no heat source. He looked back at her. She was shaking violently now, the glow of her armor dimming in rhythm with her shivering. "I'm going to open my suit," Elias said. "No," she snapped. The air in here is breathable. My sensors confirmed it when we entered. It's stale, but safe." He unlatched his helmet and pulled it off. The cold hit his face, sharp and biting, but bearable for a human. "Take off your helmet." Sailari hesitated, then obeyed. Her hands fumbled with the seals. Elias helped her, pulling the helmet free. Her face was pale. The lavender hue drained to a chalky gray. Her lips were blue. "We need to share body heat," Elias said, his voice matter-of-fact. "It's standard survival protocol." Sailari looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Touch is significant to my people." "Dying is significant to mine," Elias countered. "Come here." He unsealed the front of his heavy environmental suit, spreading the thermal lining. Sailari stared at him, a war waging behind her eyes. Survival instinct won. She crawled toward him, shedding the bulky outer plates of her armor until she was just in the gray bodysuit. Elias wrapped his suit around her, pulling her against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, encasing them both in the insulated cocoon. The reaction was immediate and startling. Where his skin touched the fabric of her suit, he felt a jolt, like static electricity but deeper. It traveled up his arms, settling in his chest as a warm, heavy thrum. Sailari gasped, her back arching slightly against him. "What was that?" Elias asked, pulling back slightly. "Do not move," she commanded, her voice breathless. "Just hold." He settled back, pulling her tight. He could feel her heart beating against his ribs. It was faster than a human heart, a rapid-fire flutter like a hummingbird. And it was sinking with him. As her body temperature began to rise, her skin began to glow. Not the armor this time, but her actual skin. Patterns of bioluminescent light swirled across her neck and face, shifting colors from soft blue to a warm, inviting gold. The scent of ozone and flowers intensified, filling the small space between them. Elias felt a strange sensation wash over him, not just physical warmth, but an emotional echo. He felt fear that wasn't his own. He felt a profound, crushing loneliness. And beneath that, a sharp, terrified curiosity. "I can feel you," Elias whispered. "Not just your body, I can feel you." Sailari turned her head. Her face was inches from his. Her eyes were wide, the nebula within them spinning wildly. "My people are empathic to touch. It is how we bond, how we choose mates, how we declare loyalty." Elias swallowed hard. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. He was holding an alien woman in a dark tunnel on a dead world. and he felt more connected to her than he had to anyone in years. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." "Do not be," she said softly. The shivering had stopped. Her gaze dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes. The gold patterns on her skin pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. "You are surprisingly warm, human. You burn so brightly." "We run hot," Elias murmured. She didn't pull away. For a long time, they just sat there, wrapped in the silence of the tomb, the storm raging outside a distant memory. Elias was acutely aware of the curve of her waist, the softness of her hair against his cheek, the alien firmness of her muscles. "Who are you really?" "Sayalari," he asked again, softly. She stiffened, the emotional connection abruptly turning jagged with guilt. She closed her eyes. "Someone who should not be here. That makes two of us." She didn't answer. Eventually, her breathing evened out, and the rapid flutter of her heart slowed to a steady rhythm. She fell asleep in his arms, the golden light on her skin fading to a soft, steady pulse. Elias stayed awake, watching the shadows, holding the woman who had fallen from the sky. He wondered what kind of scavenger wore armor that cost more than a starship and cried out in her sleep with the voice of a frightened child. The dream took Sayalari the moment she drifted off. She was back in the Obsidian Palace, the great hall stretching out before her. Banners of the Varelian Empire draping from the crystalline ceiling. The air was cold, colder than the tunnel. Her father sat on the throne of shards. He was immense, his armor fused to his body, his eyes burning with the weight of 1,000 conquered systems. He was not looking at her with love. He was looking at her with disappointment. "You have a weakness in you, Sayalari," his voice boomed, vibrating through her bones. "You look at the lesser races and you see life. You should see only variables. They are living beings." "Father," she pleaded, her voice small. "They feel, they love it." The Emperor stood. The sound of his movement was like a mountain cracking. He descended the steps, towering over her. He reached out a massive hand and gripped her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Sympathy is a poison," he hissed. "It rots the will. It topples empires." The scene shifted. The palace walls melted away, replaced by the burning ruin of a city. Skyscrapers of glass and steel were crumbling into dust. The sky was choked with smoke. Millions of voices screamed in unison. "Look," her father commanded, pointing a gauntleted finger at the devastation. "This is what happens when you hesitate. This is the legacy of mercy." Sayalari looked in the rubble. She saw bodies, thousands of them. But they weren't Varelian. They were human, and standing over them, laughing, were other humans. "If you ever feel sympathy for a human," her father's voice whispered in her ear, cold as the void, "remember what they did to the trinary worlds. Remember that they are not creators. Sayalari, they are consumers. They will take your warmth, your trust, and your power, and they will leave you hollow." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The burning city reflected in his eyes. "Do not trust them," he roared. "Kill the boy. Kill the softness in your heart, or you will be the death of us all." Sayalari woke with a gasp, her body jerking violently. "Easy," a voice said. "Easy. I've got you." She blinked, the nightmare fading into the gray reality of the tunnel. Elias was there, his face etched with concern, his arms still holding her tight. The heat of his body was a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in her stomach. She looked at him. This primitive male, this fragile creature of soft skin and red blood. He had saved her from the cold. He held her with a gentleness that defied everything she had been taught about his species. but her father's voice still echoed in her mind. They will leave you hollow. Bad dream? Elias asked gently. Sailari pulled away from him, scrambling out of his suit and reaching for her armor plates. She needed the metal. She needed the barrier. We must move, she said, her voice shaking. The storm has passed. Sailari, wait. Put your helmet on. Elias, she commanded, snapping her breastplate into place. She didn't look at him. She couldn't, because the terrifying truth was not that he would leave her hollow. The terrifying truth was that for the first time in her life, she felt full, and that was a treason punishable by death. We need to find the power source, she said, her voice hardening into the tone of a princess of the Varelian Empire. And then we need to get off this rock. She turned and walked deeper into the darkness, leaving the human to follow. The descent into the bowels of the island was a journey into the throat of a dead beast. The air grew heavy and metallic, tasting of copper and stagnant time. Elias followed the glowing silhouette of Sailari, her armor casting long, dancing shadows against the smooth walls of the tunnel. They had left the rough, volcanic natural caverns 2 hours ago, crossing a threshold where jagged rock gave way to a seamless, dark alloy that absorbed the light of their torches rather than reflecting it. This was not just a bunker. It was a tomb of technology. Elias ran his gloved hand along the wall as they walked. The material felt slick, almost oily, though it was dry to the touch. It hummed with a faint subsonic vibration that rattled in his molars. This architecture, Elias said, his voice echoing strangely in the corridor. I've seen human bunkers, Earth Alliance dreadnoughts, even captured trinary battleships. This is older, much older. Sailari did not look back. She moved with a predatory grace, her rifle raised, scanning the darkness ahead. It is pre-collapse architecture, she said, from the era of glass, before my people turned their eyes toward conquest. Your people built this? Elias asked. I thought you were a scavenger, and you talk like a historian. Scavengers must know the history of what they steal, she replied smoothly, though the rhythm of her walk stiffened slightly. Knowing the difference between a reactor core and a waste disposal unit is the difference between riches and radiation poisoning. They reached a massive circular door, sealed tight. It was etched with intricate geometric patterns that spiraled inward toward a central locking mechanism. To Elias, it looked like art. To Sailari, it clearly looked like a lock she knew how to pick. She approached the control panel set into the wall. It was dead, a slab of black crystal. She placed her palm against it. Nothing happened. She whispered a phrase in a language Elias didn't understand. A liquid, clicking tongue that sounded like water flowing over stones. The panel flared to life. Deep crimson light flooded the corridor. The geometric patterns on the door began to rotate, grinding with the sound of tectonic plates shifting. Elias watched her closely. It wasn't just that she knew the language. It was the way she stood. She didn't hunch over the console like a hacker trying to bypass security. She stood tall, her chin raised, expecting the machine to obey. The door hissed open, revealing a vast cavernous chamber beyond. They stepped inside. The room was a sphere, suspended over a dark abyss by gravity tethers that hummed with ancient power. Banks of data crystals, glowing with a faint amber pulse, lined the walls like the books of a forgotten library. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and hovering above it was a sealed vault made of a material that seemed to absorb all light. Etched into the surface in burning white letters were symbols Elias translated with his suit's universal interface. Nexus 00. Jackpot, Elias murmured. Sayalari moved toward the consoles, her eyes scanning the streams of data that began to cascade down the holographic displays. "This is a control hub," she said, her voice tight. "A regional command center for the planetary defense grid. It has been offline for 3,000 years. Elias wandered toward a rack of weapons mounted on the far wall. They were pulse rifles, sleek and silver, devoid of triggers or magazines. He reached out to touch one, but a sudden flicker of movement caught his eye. A holographic node near Sayalari had been activated. A recorded image materialized, a Varelian soldier in ceremonial armor, flickering like a ghost. The soldier looked straight at Sayalari, or rather, at the space she occupied. The hologram slammed a fist to its chest, a salute of absolute subservience. Commander," the recording crackled. "The timeline is compromised, and we are sealing the vault under Imperial Edict Alpha 1. Sayalari swiped her hand through the hologram, shattering the image into sparks of light before it could finish speaking. She typed a command furiously into the console, burying the file. Elias stood still, his hand hovering near the pulse rifle. He had seen that salute before. He had seen it in intelligence briefings regarding the Varelian Royal Guard. They only saluted that way for blood relatives of the throne. He looked at the crest etched into Sayalari's shoulder plate, a stylized sun being devoured by a serpent. He had assumed it was a unit insignia. Now, seeing it reflected on the walls of this ancient place, he realized it was a dynastic seal. "Imperial Edict Alpha 1, Elias said, stepping closer to the central pedestal. "That's a high-level quarantine protocol. For a scavenger, you have remarkably high clearance." Sayalari froze. She didn't turn around. "I hacked the encryption key algorithms years ago. It is a common exploit among the trade guilds." "Right," Elias said. He didn't push it. Not yet. He walked up to the central vault, the Nexus unit. It was pulsing with a low, rhythmic throb, like a mechanical heart. "So, what's in the box? Weapons, gold, the keys to the galaxy?" "Information," Sayalari said, finally turning to face him. Her face was pale in the amber light of the data crystals. "And perhaps a way off this rock. The Nexus units were often linked to experimental transport gates." "A teleporter?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "I thought those were myths. Theoretical physics that killed anyone who tried it." "The science is sound," Sayalari said, walking toward the vault. "But the energy requirements are astronomical, and the biometrics are strict." She stopped in front of the vault. A panel slid open on its surface, revealing a hand scanner shaped for a Varelian hand, long fingers, narrow palm. The scanner glowed with a menacing red light. "It is DNA locked," Sayalari said, frustration leaking into her voice. "It requires a genetic marker from the original project leads. The standard gene keys I possess will not work." Elias leaned against the console, crossing his arms. "You know, if I didn't know better, I'd say you're disappointed you can't just order it to open. Like you ordered that door." Sayalari shot him a glare that could have cut glass. "I bypassed the door's logic circuit. This is a biological lock. It is different." "Sure," Elias said. He gestured to the scanner. "Well, we're stuck. Unless you have a dead ancient scientist in your pocket." He laughed, a dry sound. "You know, back on Earth, I used to joke that I was a prisoner of my job. Now I'm literally trapped in a dungeon with an alien warrior queen who claims to be a junk dealer. If I'm your prisoner, Sayalari, you can just say so. I promise I won't try to escape." Sayalari's expression darkened. She stepped closer to him, her height and the bulk of her armor making her loom over him. "Do not mock things you do not understand. Elias, you are not my prisoner. She leaned down, her voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated in his chest. You are far more dangerous than any prisoner. Human. A prisoner is contained. You are an unpredictable variable in an equation that could incinerate this entire sector. Elias held her gaze. He didn't blink. Is that why you saved me? To solve an equation? I saved you because I am a fool, she snapped, turning back to the vault. And now we are both going to die here because I cannot open this infernal lock. She struck the side of the vault with her fist in a rare display of lost temper. Elias looked at the scanner again. The red light pulsed invitingly. He felt a strange sensation in his fingertips, a tingling, like pins and needles that traveled up his arm and settled in the base of his neck. It was the same feeling he had experienced when the shuttle crashed, a sense of inevitability. Let me try, Elias said. Sayalari looked at him as if he had suggested growing wings and flying away. Do not be absurd. That scanner is tuned to specific Varelian genetic sequences. If a non-compatible species touches it, the defense mechanism will discharge 10,000 volts through your nervous system. It will stop your heart instantly. Elias stepped forward, drawn by a pull he couldn't explain. I don't think it will. Elias, stop, Sayalari ordered, stepping in front of him. This is not a human toy. It is a kill switch. Trust me, Elias said. He gently moved her aside. She was strong enough to break him in half, but she let him move her. She was too stunned by his audacity. He hovered his hand over the scanner. The tingling intensified. It wasn't painful. It was magnetic. It felt like the machine was reaching out to him. Elias, no! Sayalari screamed, lunging for him. He slammed his hand down onto the scanner. He braced himself for the agony, for the smell of his own burning flesh. Sayalari's hand gripped his shoulder, trying to rip him away. But he was immovable, rooted to the spot. There was no pain. Instead, a cool wave of sensation washed over him. The red light under his palm flickered, turned white, and then shifted to a brilliant, soothing emerald green. A chime rang out, clear and pure, identity confirmed. A synthetic voice boomed, speaking in the same ancient dialect Sayalari had used, but Elias understood it perfectly. Welcome, Peacekeeper. The heavy locking bolts of the vault retracted with a thunderous clank. The lid hissed open, releasing a plume of cryo-vapor. Elias stood there, his hands still on the scanner, breathing heavily. He felt drained, as if the machine had taken a pint of blood as payment, but he was alive. He turned to look at Sayalari. She had backed away, her back pressed against the console. Her helmet was off, and her face was a mask of absolute terrifying shock. Her bioluminescent eyes were wide, the nebula within them swirling in a chaotic storm of confusion and fear. How? She whispered. The word barely had enough breath to carry across the room. That is impossible. You are human. You are primitive. Elias looked at his hand. It looked the same as it always had, scarred, calloused, human. I don't know, he said honestly. I knew it wouldn't hurt me. I felt it. Sayalari stared at him, her gaze shifting from his face to his hand and back again. She looked like she was seeing a ghost or a monster. We should make camp, Elias said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. The storm outside is picking up again, and we need to rest before we see what's inside that vault. Sayalari nodded slowly, mechanically. She didn't look at the vault. She couldn't stop looking at him. They made camp in a smaller antechamber off the main control hub, a room that had likely been a guard station eons ago. The air recycling systems were still functional here, blowing warm, dry air from the vents. Elias built a small fire using chemical tablets from his survival pack and some pieces of dried, petrified wood he had scavenged near the tunnel entrance. The flames crackled, casting flickering orange light that danced against the sleek, futuristic walls. It was a clash of eras, the primal fire against the ancient high-tech. They ate in silence. Elias chewed on a nutrient bar that tasted like cardboard and vitamins. Sayalari consumed a small pouch of liquid protein she carried in her belt. She had removed her heavy armor plating again, sitting cross-legged on the floor in her bodysuit, staring into the flames. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The incident with the scanner hung between them like a loaded weapon. "You're staring at me like I'm going to grow a second head," Elias said, breaking the silence. He tossed a wrapper into the fire. Sayalari looked up, the firelight reflected in her eyes, turning the blue swirls to a deep, violet purple. "You accessed a Tier 1 Varelian security interface. There are pure-blood members of my own court who could not have done that. Maybe your history books are wrong." Elias shrugged. "Maybe humans and Varelians go back further than you think." "Our history is precise," she countered sharply. "We kept records while your ancestors were still hitting rocks together to make sparks." "Clearly not precise enough," Elias said softly. He leaned back against the wall, stretching his legs. "Look, I don't have answers. Sayalari, I'm just a mechanic who got lucky." "You are not just a mechanic," she said. "I saw your file on the scanner. It called you Peacekeeper. That is not a mechanic's title." Elias looked away, staring into the heart of the fire. The flames reminded him of the burning shuttle, of the explosion that had killed his crew. "I wasn't always fixing engines," he admitted quietly. 6 months ago, I was part of the Terra Nova envoy. We were a diplomatic corps sent to the fringe systems to negotiate a ceasefire with the separatist factions. Sayalari tilted her head. "The Terra Nova envoy. I heard of it. It was destroyed. They said it was a tragic navigational error. The ship flew into a star." "It wasn't an error," Elias said, his voice hard. "It was sabotage. Someone rigged the hyperdrive to overload. I was in the engineering bay when the cascade started. I managed to get to an escape pod, but the others, the diplomats, the peacemakers, they didn't make it." He looked at his hands. "I wasn't supposed to survive. I was supposed to burn with them. I drifted for weeks before a scrapper picked me up. I've been hiding ever since, taking odd jobs, trying to stay off the grid. Because whoever blew up that ship knows I'm the only witness who saw the override codes." "You were a diplomat?" Sayalari asked. Her voice was softer now, the edge of interrogation gone. "I was a believer," Elias corrected. "I thought we could end the war. I thought if we just talked to each other, if we just stopped shooting for 5 minutes, we could find common ground." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out, peace is bad for business, especially for the weapon guilds." Sayalari watched him. For the first time, the mask of the imperious warrior slipped completely. She looked sad. She looked burdened. "I know what it is like," she whispered, "to want peace when your world demands war." She shifted, moving closer to the fire, closer to him. "My father. He believes that strength is the only currency the galaxy respects. He taught me that mercy is a flaw. The rule is to dominate." "Your father sounds like a charmer," Elias said. "He is the emperor," she said simply. She didn't correct herself this time. The secret was out, suspended in the air between them. "And I am Sayalari, first daughter of the blood, heir to the throne of shards." Elias looked at her. He didn't bow. He didn't gasp. He just nodded. I figured the armor gave it away, and the attitude. A faint smile touched her lips. It was the first time he had seen her smile. It transformed her face, softening the sharp angles, making her look less like a statue and more like a woman. I am fleeing him, Elias. There was a coup. My cousin, Val, he convinced the High Council that I was unfit, that I was weak because I refused to authorize the orbital bombardment of a rebel colony. You saved them? I hesitated, she said, looking down at her hands. And in my hesitation, Val struck. I barely escaped the palace. I have been running for 3 cycles. So we're both runaways, Elias said. A dead diplomat and an exiled princess. A pair of ghosts, she agreed. The silence that followed was comfortable, a shared understanding of loss and fear. The fire popped, sending a spark spiraling upward. Sayalari reached out. Her hand moved slowly, hesitantly, as if she were approaching a wild animal. She placed her palm on Elias's shoulder, her fingers brushing against the bare skin of his neck where his collar was open. The reaction was instantaneous. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with static. Elias drew in a sharp breath. Her skin was cool, but where she touched him, it felt like fire, not burning, but electric. He could feel her pulse in his own veins. He looked up at her. Her eyes were glowing brightly, the blue nebula spinning in a hypnotic rhythm. Her lips were parted slightly, her breathing shallow. Elias, she whispered. Her voice wasn't just sound. He felt it in his mind, a soft echo of her intent. Sayalari, he replied. He covered her hand with his own, her fingers laced with his. The physical connection amplified the empathic link. He felt her loneliness, vast and deep as the void between stars. He felt her fear, sharp and jagged, and beneath it all, he felt a hunger, a raw, desperate desire to be known, to be seen, not as a title but as a soul. She leaned in. The scent of ozone and exotic flowers filled his senses. He leaned forward to meet her. The world outside the firelight ceased to exist. There was only her. Only the light in her eyes and the electric heat of her touch. Their faces were inches apart. He could feel the warmth of her breath on his lips. He tilted his head, closing his eyes, ready to bridge the gap between their worlds. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The sound tore through the quiet like a serrated blade. Red strobe lights erupted from the ceiling, bathing the room in the color of blood. A siren wailed, a high-pitched, rhythmic scream that signaled imminent danger. Sayalari jerked back, the connection severing with the violence of a physical blow. She scrambled to her feet, reaching for her weapon. "Proximity alert!" she shouted, her voice shifting instantly back to command mode. "Sensors have detected an atmospheric breach directly above us." Elias grabbed his pack, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from passion anymore, but from adrenaline. The storm. "No," Sayalari said, checking her wrist display. Her face went pale. "A ship. A heavy dropship. It's decaying." A massive boom shook the foundation of the outpost. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The sound of heavy thrusters vibrated through the walls, a deep, grinding roar that grew louder by the second. "They found us," Sayalari said, looking at Elias. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the cold steel of the warrior. "Val found us." "How?" Elias asked, checking the charge on his scavenged pistol. "The interface," she said, looking toward the main chamber. "When you opened the vault, the energy signature must have pierced the storm interference. We lit a beacon in the dark." The ceiling above them groaned. Metal screeched as landing claws dug into the structure of the ruins above. "They are on the surface," Sayalari said. She grabbed Elias by the arm. "We have to move. If they breach the upper airlock, we will be trapped in the hub." "And where?" Elias asked. "Deeper?" "Yes," Sayalari said, pulling him toward the dark corridor that led away from the vault. "Into the dark, before the lights go out for good." They ran into the shadows just as the sound of cutting lasers began to hiss through the metal roof above them. The hunt had begun. The ceiling of the ancient control hub did not collapse so much as it dissolved. A concentrated beam of coherent plasma bored through the meter-thick alloy above them, turning the metal into a dripping, glowing slag that rained down on the periphery of the chamber. The air instantly grew hot, smelling of ozone and scorched history. Through the breach, dark shapes descended on anti-gravity tethers, moving with the synchronized precision of a hive mind. There were 6 of them. They hit the floor in unison, their boots making a single heavy thud that vibrated through the deck plates. They were encased in armor the color of a starless void, sleek and faceless, with violet sensor strips pulsating where their eyes should be. Sayalari stood before Elias, her posture shifting instantly from that of a vulnerable woman to the air of the Varelian Empire. She summoned her hard light gauntlets, the energy crackling around her fists like contained lightning. "The Obsidian Guard," she whispered, her voice tight. "Regent Val does not send them for arrests. He sends them for erasures." The leader of the squad stepped forward. He was larger than the others, his armor adorned with the silver trim of a Praetorian executioner. His helmet synthesized his voice into a grinding, mechanical baritone that filled the cavernous room. "Princess Sayalari," the commander said, "you are in violation of Imperial Decree 7-9. You have fled the throne, consorted with a primitive species, and accessed forbidden archives. Surrender your vitals for transport, or be pacified." A scanner beam swept out from the commander's visor, washing over Elias. The light turned an angry, flashing crimson. "Subject identified as human." The commander's voice took on a disgusted edge. "Genetic scan reveals anomalies. This is not merely primitive. It is a biological aberration. Protocol demands immediate incineration." 2 of the soldiers raised their pulse rifles, leveling them at Elias's chest. "Stand down!" Sayalari shouted, her voice echoing with the command tone she had been trained to use since birth. She stepped fully in front of Elias, using her body as a shield. "I invoke the Island Treaty of Sector 4. This territory is neutral ground designated for scientific preservation. Imperial military action here is a violation of the Ancestral Compact." It was a lie. Elias knew it was a lie by the way Sayalari's back muscles tensed against his chest. She was stalling, throwing complex legalese at a tactical computer in hopes of confusing its logic processors for a few precious seconds. The commander paused. His helmet tilted slightly as his internal systems queried the Imperial database. "Processing claim," he droned, searching historical archives for Island Treaty parameters. "Run!" Sayalari hissed to Elias, not turning her head. "When I move, you run." "Not without you," Elias breathed back. "Query complete," the commander announced. "The Island Treaty was dissolved 400 years ago. Deception detected. Lethal force authorized." The air exploded. Sayalari moved faster than human eyes could track. She shoved Elias toward the cover of a databank just as the space where he had been standing was vaporized by a volley of plasma fire. She did not run. She attacked. She leaped forward, closing the distance to the nearest guard, her gauntlet slamming into his chest plate. The impact discharged a kinetic shockwave that sent the soldier flying backward into his squad mates, knocking them off balance. Elias scrambled behind the heavy console, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He checked his scavenger's pistol. It was a kinetic slug thrower, useless against Varelian power armor. He holstered it. He needed to think like an engineer, not a soldier. He scanned the room. The obsidian guard was recovering, spreading out in a flank formation to encircle Sayalari. She was a whirlwind of violet light, deflecting plasma bolts with energy shields projected from her forearms. But she was outnumbered. A heavy trooper was setting up a suppression cannon, aiming not at her, but at the structural supports behind her to bury her in debris. Elias saw a thick conduit running along the floor near the trooper's feet. It was pulsing with the same amber light as the data crystals, a high-voltage power coupling for the server banks. He didn't think so. He grabbed a heavy metal pry bar from his belt, a tool he had used to pry open airlocks on the surface, and hurled it. It wasn't a precise throw, but it was heavy. The bar clattered against the conduit, denting the casing but not breaking it. The heavy trooper ignored it, focusing his aim. Elias cursed. He grabbed a loose piece of debris, a jagged shard of the ceiling, and scrambled into the open. "Hey! Ugly!" The trooper turned his helmet toward Elias. Elias threw the rock. It hit the dented conduit perfectly. The casing cracked. A bolt of raw, amber electricity arced out. Seeking a ground, it found the trooper's metal armor. The soldier convulsed as thousands of volts fried his suit's servos. His suppression cannon misfired, blasting a hole in the floor that sent two other guards tumbling into the sub-levels. Sayalari used the distraction. She swept the legs of the commander, driving her knee into his faceplate as he fell, cracking the sensor strip. "Elias, the corridor!" she screamed. She grabbed him by the harness of his suit and threw him toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the complex. She followed close behind, laying down a suppressing field of energy that absorbed the incoming fire. They sprinted into the dark. The tunnel here was narrower, a service maintenance shaft that forced them to run single file. The sound of heavy boots pursued them, relentless and rhythmic. "They are faster than us," Sayalari yelled over the sound of her own breathing. "We need to lose them in the labyrinth." They took a sharp left, then a right, descending a spiral ramp that seemed to go down forever. Elias's lungs were burning. He was fit, but he wasn't a genetically enhanced super soldier. He stumbled over a raised grate, going down hard on one knee. Sayalari stopped instantly, turning back to haul him up. As she did, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling directly above her. It was a stealth unit, a guard who had engaged an optical camouflage cloak. He dropped silently, a monofilament blade aimed at the exposed joint of Sayalari's neck armor. Elias saw the shimmer in the air. He didn't have time to warn her. He lunged forward, tackling Sayalari around the waist and driving them both into the wall just as the blade sliced through the empty air where her throat had been. They crashed to the floor. The assassin landed silently, turning to strike again. Elias was on his back, Sayalari on top of him. The assassin raised the blade. Elias reached out, grabbing a hanging cluster of cables from the wall panel he had damaged in the fall. He ripped them free and thrust the sparking ends at the assassin. The live wires struck the stealth unit's chest. The optical cloak shorted out in a shower of sparks, revealing the soldier beneath. The surge caused his armor to lock up for a fraction of a second. That was all Sayalari needed. She drove her glowing fist into the assassin's midsection, crumbling the armor and sending him flying down the dark shaft of the spiral ramp. He vanished into the gloom, the sound of his impact echoing seconds later. Sayalari stared at the empty darkness, then down at Elias. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were wide, the bioluminescence flaring wildly. "You!" she gasped, pulling him to his feet. "You are persistent. I'm terrified," Elias corrected, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. "There's a difference." "Come," she said, her voice softer. There is a secure bunker below the server core. They will not check there immediately. The radiation shielding masks life signs. They move deeper, the sounds of pursuit fading into the distance as Sayalari navigated them through a maze of ventilation ducts and maintenance crawl spaces. Finally, she forced open a heavy manual hatch, and they spilled into a small, dust-choked room. It was silent. Sayalari spun the locking wheel on the hatch, sealing them in. Then, she slumped against the door, sliding down until she hit the floor. The glow of her armor faded as she deactivated her combat systems. Elias sat opposite her, resting his head against the cold metal wall. For a long time, the only sound was their ragged breathing. He looked at her. There was a scorch mark on her shoulder plate where a plasma bolt had grazed her. Her silver hair was matted with sweat and dust. She looked exhausted, battered, and incredibly alive. "You saved me," she said quietly, staring at the floor. "Twice?" "You saved me first," Elias replied. "I'm just returning the favor." "No," she shook her head. "A human defeating a Praetorian guard. It is statistically impossible. You should have fled. You should have left me to them." "Is that what a Varelian would have done?" "Yes," she said, looking up at him. Her eyes were swimming with tears she refused to shed. Self-preservation is the first law of the Empire. Loyalty is purchased, not given. Elias crawled across the small space between them. He winced as his bruised knee protested, but he didn't stop until he was sitting beside her. He reached out and took her hand. Her gauntlet was cold, but the fingers beneath were warm. "I'm not Varelian," Elias said, "and I'm not interested in statistics." Sayalari turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. The empathic bond flared to life again, stronger this time, fueled by the adrenaline that was still coursing through their blood. He felt her terror, but beneath it, he felt a surging wave of relief and a profound, aching gratitude. "I thought I was dead when you found me on those rocks," Elias whispered, his voice rough. "I was ready to die. I had nothing left. No home, no mission, just 6 days of silence." He squeezed her hand. "But now, sitting here in the dark, with half an army trying to kill us, I'm more alive than I've ever been." Sayalari's breath hitched. She reached up with her free hand, touching his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the rough stubble on his cheek. "You are a fool, Elias Thorne, a beautiful, dangerous fool." "Probably," he said. He leaned in. This time, there was no hesitation. No alarms interrupted them. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was the collision of two people who had been running for their lives and had suddenly found the only solid ground in the universe. Her lips were soft, tasting of the sweet electric ozone that seemed to permeate her biology. Sayalari made a low sound in her throat, a vibration that Elias felt in his own chest. She pulled him closer, her strength forgetting itself for a moment, the metal of her breastplate pressing hard against his chest. The kiss deepened, breaking past the barriers of species and culture. Elias felt a rush of sensation that had nothing to do with physical touch. Through their connection, he felt her desire. It was a physical force, a hunger that was vast and terrified and undeniable. He felt the walls she had built around herself, the training, the protocols, the cold lessons of her father, crumbling under the heat of the moment. She shifted, pulling him on top of her. The movement was fluid, urgent. Her hands fumbled with the latches of his survival suit. He helped her, his fingers clumsy with haste, stripping away the layers of Kevlar and insulation until he could feel her through the thin fabric of her bodysuit. When his skin touched the bare flesh of her neck, the reaction was explosive. Light flooded the room. It radiated from her, pouring from her skin in waves of gold and violet. Elias gasped as the sensation hit him, a feedback loop of pleasure and intensity that nearly overwhelmed his nervous system. It was as if every nerve ending in his body had suddenly woken up. Elias. She breathed his name like a prayer. Please. The armor was discarded. The bodysuits were stripped away. Skin met skin, and the universe narrowed down to the heat of their bodies and the desperate rhythm of their movement. It was a battle of a different kind. Sayalari's fear warred with her need. She had been taught that humans were lesser, that they were cold and hollow. But Elias was fired. He was solid and real, and he met her intensity with a raw honesty that shattered her defenses. Every touch sent ripples of color across her skin, painting her in hues of desire that illuminated the dark bunker. Elias watched her, captivated by the alien beauty of her vulnerability. She was no longer the princess. She was just Sayalari, and she was his. They moved together with a frantic energy, trying to consume each other, trying to anchor themselves against the chaos waiting outside the door. It was messy and raw and perfect. When the crest finally came, it was a shared event. Elias felt her release as if it were his own, a supernova of sensation that left them both gasping, clinging to each other as the light on her skin pulsed rapidly and then slowly faded to a soft, contented glow. They lay tangled together on the pile of their discarded suits, the air in the room thick and warm. Elias ran his hand down the curve of her spine, marveling at the smoothness of her lavender skin. Sayalari lay with her head on his chest, listening to the beat of his human heart. Slowly, the reality of what they had done began to seep back in. She stiffened. A single silver tear leaked from the corner of her eye and trailed across the bridge of her nose. "Hey," Elias whispered, brushing the tear away with his thumb. "What is it?" She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces of her shattered world together. She didn't look at him. "My people," she whispered, her voice trembling. "To mix blood with a human, it is the ultimate taboo. It is considered a corruption of the gene line, a betrayal of the highest order." She turned her face to him, her eyes filled with a tragic certainty. "They will never forgive this, Elias. Even if we escape, even if I reclaim my throne, I am tainted now. I can never go back." Elias sat up. He reached out and took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Good." Sayalari blinked, startled. "Good? They don't deserve you," Elias said fiercely. "If their laws say that what we just found is wrong, then their laws are broken. Not you." "You do not understand," she said, a sob catching in her throat. "I have nowhere to go. The galaxy is controlled by the Empire or the Federation, and neither will accept us together." "Then we'll go somewhere else," Elias promised. He leaned his forehead against hers. "We'll find a place your people don't rule. We'll go to the fringe. We'll find a ghost star. I don't care. But I am not letting you go." Sayalari closed her eyes, drawing strength from his conviction. She wanted to believe him. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for something other than duty. "The Nexus," she said suddenly, opening her eyes. "What?" "The vault," she said, scrambling to her feet and reaching for her bodysuit. "The gate inside the Nexus unit. The archives speak of the ancients using them to travel to sanctuary worlds, planets hidden in pocket dimensions, unreachable by conventional hyperdrive." Elias stood up, pulling his trousers on. "You think one of those worlds is still there?" "It is our only chance," she said. We cannot fight the Obsidian Guard. We cannot outrun their ship, but if we can activate the gate, we can vanish." She paused, her hands freezing on the clasps of her armor. "But the lock, we still cannot open it." Elias picked up his jacket. He remembered the feeling of the scanner, the green light, the welcoming voice. "Welcome, Peacekeeper." "I think I can," he said. Sayalari looked at him, the memory of the control room returning. "How? You are human." "I don't know," Elias admitted. "But the machine knew me. It called me a peacekeeper. Whatever I am, whatever my ancestors were, I have a key to that door inside my blood." Sayalari stared at him for a long moment. Then, she nodded. She grabbed her pulse rifle and checked the charge. "Then let us go, before my cousin burns this island to ash." The return to the main control hub was an exercise in stealth. The Obsidian Guard had spread out, searching the lower levels, leaving the main chamber lightly defended. Sayalari moved like a shadow, silencing a lone sentry with a precise, lethal strike to the neck before he could raise the alarm. They crept back into the vast circular room. The hole in the ceiling still smoldered, revealing the dark sky above. But the chamber was empty of enemies for the moment. The Nexus vault sat in the center, still humming, the lid open where Elias had unlocked the outer seal. But inside, there was a secondary barrier, a swirling vortex of opaque energy that blocked access to the gate mechanism itself. A new console had risen from the pedestal. It displayed a complex double helix pattern that rotated slowly. "This is it," Sayalari whispered, crouching behind the console. "The inner core, it requires a direct bio-interface to target the destination." She looked at the helix. "It is a complex sequence. If I attempt to bypass it, the system will purge the buffer and the gate will destabilize." "Let me," Elias said. He stepped up to the console. The room was quiet, save for the distant sounds of the search parties below. He placed his hand on the interface plate. Again, the sensation, the tingling warmth, the feeling of being known. The helix on the screen spun faster. The red light of the console shifted to amber, then to green. Genetic marker recognized. The voice boomed. "Subject, Hybrid Class A. Designation, Project Harmony." Sayalari gasped. "Hybrid?" Elias froze. Hybrid. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He looked at his hand. It looked human. It bled red. But the machine saw something else. "Access granted," the voice continued. "Destination coordinates locked. Site Omega. Sanctuary." The vortex inside the vault spun wildly, expanding outward. The opaque energy cleared, revealing a shimmering event horizon, a window into another place. Through the ripple, Elias caught a glimpse of a metallic structure, a moon base orbiting a shattered planet. "It is open," Elias said, his voice hollow. "Site Omega." "Elias," Sayalari said, grabbing his arm. Her eyes were searching his face. "Project Harmony. That was a myth. A rumor of a secret Varelian experiment to splice our DNA with emerging species to create intermediaries, ambassadors." "I'm not a diplomat," Elias whispered, the realization crashing down on him. "I'm a lab rat. I was built—" "No," Sayalari said fiercely. She gripped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You are the man who saved me. You are the man who made me feel, I do not care what your blood says. I care about you." A heavy thud echoed from the corridor. Voices shouted. The guard was returning. "We have to go," Sayalari said. "Now!" She pulled him toward the gate. Elias stumbled, his mind reeling, but he followed her. They stepped up to the edge of the event horizon. "Together," Elias said, gripping her hand. "Together," Sayalari vowed. They leaped into the light. Behind them, the door to the chamber burst open. The commander of the Obsidian Guard fired his weapon, but he was too late. The bolt passed harmlessly through the space where they had been. The gate flared once, blinding white, and then collapsed in on itself, leaving the room silent and empty. The transition was not like falling asleep or waking up. It was a violent deconstruction of reality. One moment, Elias was standing in the subterranean vault of the dead island, his hand gripping Sayalari's fingers. The next, he was nowhere, scattered into a billion points of data that screamed across the void between worlds. Then, he was solid again. The air rushed into his lungs, tasting stale and recycled, carrying the distinct metallic tang of pressurized atmosphere. He fell to his knees, retching dryly as his inner ear rebelled against a sudden shift in gravity. It was lighter here. Ghostly. He pushed against the floor and floated upward an inch before settling back down. Sayalari was already standing. She staggered, shaking her head to clear the disorientation, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm at her hip. Her bioluminescent eyes flared wide, cutting through the gloom of the arrival chamber. They were in a rotunda of glass and steel, suspended over a view that stole the breath from Elias's chest. Outside the massive blast-shielded viewports, the dead island was a speck on a bruised planet rotating slowly below them. They were in orbit. But they were not on a ship. They were standing on the precipice of a shattered moon. Debris fields of jagged rock and glittering ice floated in the vacuum outside, remnants of some cataclysmic impact that had cracked the satellite open like an egg. The facility itself seemed to be clinging to the largest fragment of the moon, a precarious leech of metal buried in the gray dust. "Site Omega," Sayalari whispered. She walked toward a console that was flickering with low-power standby lights. Her movements were bounding, graceful arcs in the low gravity. "It is real, the sanctuary moon." Elias stood up, his legs feeling heavy and light at the same time. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. "The machine," he rasped. "It called me a hybrid. It said I was Project Harmony." Sayalari did not look at him. She was typing furiously into the console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "The data from the transit, it decoded your biometric signature. Elias, I am reading the buffer logs now." She stopped typing. Her shoulders stiffened. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Sayalari?" She turned slowly. Her face was pale, the lavender pigment of her skin looking almost gray in the harsh emergency lighting. She looked at him not with the warmth she had shown in the bunker, but with a terrified awe. "The markers are undeniable," she said softly. "Your genetic code contains sequences that have been extinct in the Varelian genome for 5,000 years. You carry the blood of the first dynasty spliced with human resilience." Elias felt a cold pit open in his stomach. "So I'm a science experiment. Is that it? My ancestors were test tubes?" "No." Sayalari stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You are proof. For 3 millennia, the Empire has taught that humanity is a plague, a chaotic variable that must be contained. We were told we are biologically incompatible, that we are oil and water." She reached out, her fingers hovering inches from his chest. "But you exist, which means our history is a lie. The Empire did not just fight humans, we tried to become them, and we tried to merge." "Why?" Elias asked. "If you hate us so much, why try to make more of us?" "To create a bridge," Sayalari said, her voice trembling. "Or perhaps, to create a weapon." She turned back to the corridor leading out of the rotunda. "We need to see the rest of this facility. The answers are not in the logs, they are in the labs." They moved deeper into the station. The corridors were dark, lit only by the intermittent strobing of emergency beacons. The air grew colder. Frost rimed the corners of the bulkheads. It was a tomb, silent save for the hum of the life support scrubbers fighting a losing battle against centuries of decay. They found the main laboratory in the center of the complex. It was a vast cavernous space lined with rows of cylindrical tanks that stretched up into the darkness of the vaulted ceiling. Cryochambers. Most were dark, their glass cracked, the occupants long since reduced to dust. But in the center of the room, a cluster of 50 pods remained active, bathed in a soft, preserving blue light. Elias walked toward the nearest one. He wiped the frost from the glass with his sleeve. He recoiled, stumbling back as if he had been struck. Inside the pod, suspended in a gel suspension fluid, was a child. A boy, no older than 10. He had human features, round ears, soft jaw, but his skin was a pale, iridescent violet, and ridges of bone protected his spine. He was sleeping, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm slowed by the cryostasis. Elias moved to the next pod, a girl. Silver hair like Sayalari's, but human eyes. "They are hybrids," Sayalari whispered, walking down the row, her expression one of horror and grief. "Dozens of them, preserved in the moment of their creation." "They're children," Elias said, his voice thick with revulsion. "They aren't ambassadors. They aren't weapons. They're kids." He looked around the room. He saw surgical tables. He saw gene splicing arrays. He saw the tools of a butcher disguised as science. He thought of his own family, of the stories of his great-grandparents who had been gifted with long life and strange intuition. He realized with a sick clarity that he was looking at his own cousins, his own origins. "This place is a slaughterhouse," Elias spat. "They bred us. They played God with 2 species and then locked the failures in a freezer on a broken moon." "They are not failures," Sayalari said, staring at the sleeping boy. "They are the truth. If the Empire knew of this, if the trinary world saw that the royal bloodline is compatible with human DNA, the entire foundation of the caste system would crumble. The war would lose its ideological justification. Is that all you see?" Elias turned on her, anger flaring hot and bright. "Politics, leverage, Sayalari, look at them. They've been frozen for centuries. They are prisoners. They are evidence," Sayalari snapped, turning to face him. The warrior mask was back in place, hardened by the shock of the discovery. "We can use this. We can broadcast the facility's archives. We can show the galaxy that we are not enemies by blood." "We need to destroy it," Elias said. He walked over to the main control terminal, his hand hovering over the reactor purge protocols. "We need to wake them up, get them out, and then burn this place to the ground. No one should ever be able to do this again." "You cannot destroy it." Sayalari moved to intercept him, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was iron. "This is history, Elias. It is ugly. Yes, it is cruel. But it is the only thing that might stop my cousin. If I destroy the proof, I am just a usurper. If I show them this, I am a reformer." "You want to use them?" Elias pulled his arm free, staring at her with disbelief. "Just like your ancestors did. You want to use these kids as pawns to get your throne back?" "I want to save my people from a war that will never end," Sayalari shouted, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You think small, human. You see the pain of the few. I see the survival of the many." "And that," Elias said, his voice cold and quiet, "is why your people are losing their soul." He stepped back from her. "I'm going to find the hangar. I'm going to find a ship. And if I can't get these kids out, I'm going to make sure no one else gets in." "Elias, wait." "Don't," he cut her off. You stay here with your evidence. Princess, I'm going to be primitive. He turned and stormed out of the laboratory, leaving her standing alone in the blue light of the cryo chambers. Sayalari watched him go. She wanted to call him back. She wanted to explain that she didn't view them as pawns, that she was terrified of the responsibility staring her in the face. But the training held her tongue. A ruler did not beg. A ruler made the hard choice. She turned back to the console and began the sequence to decrypt the archive files. She worked for 10 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans. Then, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. It wasn't a sound. It was a displacement of air, a shift in pressure. Sayalari spun around, drawing her pulse pistol. The shadows in the corner of the room rippled. 3 figures materialized from the darkness, their stealth cloaks flickering and dying as they engaged their combat systems. They were not the heavy troopers of the Obsidian Guard. These were phantoms, Regent Val's personal liquidation squad, agile, silent, and armed with monofilament blades that could slice through diamond. "Target acquired," the lead assassin hissed. His voice was a digitized whisper. "No capture. Terminate." Sayalari fired. The blue bolt of plasma struck the leader's shield, flaring harmlessly. The assassins moved with terrifying speed. They didn't run. They flowed, using the low gravity to launch themselves off the walls and ceiling. Sayalari rolled to the side, avoiding a strike that cleaved the metal floor where she had been standing. She scrambled behind a surgical table, firing blindly over the edge. "Val sent you to kill his own blood?" she shouted, trying to buy time. "Val has no blood," the assassin replied, leaping over the table. "Only the throne." Sayalari kicked the table up, blocking the strike, but the assassin was too fast. He backhanded her, the kinetic impact of his gauntlet sending her flying across the room. She hit the glass of a cryo chamber hard, the impact cracking the pod. She slid to the floor, dazed, her pistol skittered away across the tiles. The 3 assassins landed in a semicircle around her. They raised their blades. There was no hesitation, no monologue, just the cold efficiency of death. Sayalari looked up at the lead assassin. She didn't close her eyes. She would not die in the dark. A deafening roar tore through the room. The lead assassin's head vanished in a mist of violet blood and shattered armor. The sound of a heavy rotary cannon spinning up filled the air, a mechanical scream that drowned out the hum of the cryopods. Elias stood in the doorway. He was holding a massive rusted weapon he had ripped from a defensive turret mount. A twin-barreled kinetic autocannon meant for a starship, not a man. He had rigged the firing mechanism with exposed wires. "Get away from her!" Elias roared. The remaining 2 assassins spun around, their stealth cloaks engaging. Elias didn't bother aiming. He simply unleashed a wall of lead. The cannon bucked in his arms, the recoil massive even in the low gravity, pushing him backward. The stream of high-velocity rounds chewed through the laboratory, shattering glass, shredding metal, and tearing the air apart. The assassins danced through the hail of bullets, but they couldn't dodge a storm. One round caught the second assassin in the leg, spinning him around. A second round took him in the chest, punching through his shield and blowing him apart. The third assassin launched himself at the ceiling, pushing off to dive-bomb Elias. "Sayalari! Up!" Elias shouted. Sayalari didn't ask questions. She grabbed a shard of glass from the broken floor and threw it. It wasn't a lethal weapon, but it was a distraction. The assassin flinched, batting the glass away. In that split second, Elias walked his fire upward. The stream of bullets caught the assassin in midair, pinning him against the ceiling strut before cutting the support beam. The assassin fell, buried under a ton of collapsing steel. Silence slammed back into the room, ringing in their ears. Elias dropped the heavy cannon. It clattered loudly on the floor. He stood there, chest heaving, his hands burned from the hot barrel, looking wild and terrifying. Sailari scrambled to her feet. She ran to him. She didn't stop. She collided with him, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "You came back," she sobbed, the composure of the Empress finally shattering completely. "You walked away, and you came back." Elias wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her off the ground. He held her tight enough to bruise. "I told you," he whispered into her hair. "I'm not leaving. Not ever." "We have to move," Sailari said, pulling back to look at him. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. "More will come. The sensors indicate a breach in the lower gravity well. We need to hide." "Where?" "The zero-G core," she said. "The stabilizers are offline there. They won't expect us to go into the instability. It is the only place left." The core of the station was a spherical chamber where the artificial gravity plating had failed completely. Floating debris, data pads, tools, droplets of leaked coolant drifted in the air like a slow-motion galaxy. Elias and Sailari floated in the center of the space, holding onto a maintenance railing to anchor themselves. The silence here was absolute. It felt like being inside a womb or a grave. Sailari was shaking. The adrenaline of the fight had worn off, leaving her cold and brittle. She curled in on herself, her knees drawn up to her chest, floating freely. "I almost died," she whispered. "I have been trained for combat since I could walk. I have survived duels and assassination attempt, but today I was frozen." Elias pushed off the wall and drifted toward her. He reached out, catching her hand to stop her slow rotation. "You weren't frozen. You were outnumbered." "No." She looked at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "I was scared, not of death. I have never feared death." She pulled him closer. In the weightlessness, the movement was effortless. "I was scared that if I died, I would never feel you touch me again. I was scared that the last thing you would remember of me was our argument." "Sailari." "I am terrified, Elias," she confessed, the words spilling out in a rush. "I am terrified of what you are to me. My father warned me that sympathy would make me weak. He was right. You have made me weak, because now I have something to lose." Elias looked at her, this alien royalty, this warrior who could command starships, floating broken and honest in the dark. "That's not a weakness," Elias said softly. He reached out and cupped her face. "That's the only thing that makes any of this matter. If you don't have something to lose, you're just fighting for a chair in an empty room." He moved closer, his body drifting until it aligned with hers. "I'm scared too. I'm scared that I'm just a genetic accident, that I was built to be a key, not a person." Sailari shook her head violently. "No. You are the most real thing in this universe." She leaned in and kissed him. It was different from the kiss in the bunker. That had been desperate, fueled by the need to survive. This was slow. It was aching. It was a question and an answer all at once. In the absence of gravity, their bodies did not have weight, only mass and heat. Elias wrapped his legs around hers, anchoring them together in the void. He felt every inch of her against him, the friction of their suits, the heat of her skin radiating through the fabric. "Make me forget," Sailari whispered against his lips. "Make me forget the Empire. Make me forget the war. Just be here." They drifted in the center of the silent room, turning slowly in the air. Sailari's hands found the clasps of his jacket, pushing it away. It floated off, a dark shape in the gloom. Elias stripped the bodysuit from her shoulders, revealing the lavender skin that glowed with a soft, pulsing rhythm in the darkness. When they came together, it was a sensation of total suspension. There was no up or down, no hard ground to press against. There was only the leverage of each other's bodies. Every movement had an equal and opposite reaction, requiring a focus and an intimacy that was dizzying. Elias held her hips, guiding their movement. Sailari arched her back, her silver hair floating around her face like a halo of moonlight. She gasped, the sound loud in the quiet chamber. "I swear to you," she whispered, her voice breaking as she looked into his eyes, "I will burn the galaxy before I let them take you." "And I will build you a new one," Elias promised, kissing the hollow of her throat where her pulse beat a frantic rhythm against his lips. "A better one." The physical act was slow, a deliberate exploration of this new, weightless world they had found. Sailari's biology responded to him, her skin flushing with bioluminescent patterns that swirled and danced across her torso, lighting up the room with flashes of gold and indigo. Elias watched the light reflect in her eyes. He saw himself there, not a hybrid, not a primitive, just a man who was loved. They moved in a slow, spiraling dance, suspended in the heart of the shattered moon, miles above the dead island. For a suspended moment, the assassins, the regent, and the sleeping children in the labs did not exist. There was only the warmth of their skin, the ragged sound of their breathing, and the silent, star-strewn void watching through the cracked viewports. It was an act of defiance, a rebellion of two. When it was over, they stayed intertwined, floating in the afterglow. Sailari rested her head on Elias's chest, her arm draped over him to keep them from drifting apart. "We cannot stay here," she said eventually, her voice heavy with sleep and sorrow. "I know," Elias said. He stroked her hair, watching the dust motes dance in the emergency light. "Vale knows we are here. He will send a dreadnought next. He will vaporize the moon to bury the truth." Sailari lifted her head. The softness in her eyes hardened into resolve. "We need to send the signal. We need to broadcast the archives." "And the children?" Elias asked. "We will wake them," Sailari said. "We will take as many as we can fit on the shuttle. And we will run." "Where?" "To the gas city," Sailari said, remembering a contact file she had seen in the archives. "There is a dissident cell there, and there is someone you need to meet. The archives mentioned a keeper, a guardian of the project who escaped." Elias nodded. He kissed her forehead. "Then let's go start a revolution." They separated, gathering their floating clothes in the silence. As they dressed, they didn't speak, but the air between them had changed. The fear was still there, but the loneliness was gone. They were no longer just survivors. They were partners. And the galaxy was about to find out exactly how dangerous that could be. The transmission bar on the holographic display crawled agonizingly toward completion. 98%. 99. Elias stood by the communication console of the Site Omega Moon Base, his hand hovering near the manual override. Outside the reinforced glass, the stars were beginning to blur as the proximity alarms wailed. Regent Val's fleet had arrived. Sailari stood on the other side of the room, her eyes locked on the screen. She had stripped the encryption from the Imperial archives, laying bare 3,000 years of lies, genetic manipulation, and the slaughtered innocence of the hybrid children sleeping in the rooms below. "Upload complete," the computer announced, its synthetic voice maddeningly calm. "It is done," Sailari whispered. She didn't look relieved. She looked like someone who had just set fire to her own house to kill the spiders inside. "Every rebel cell, Every trade guild and every independent system within range just received the proof. The Empire is naked, and we are dead if we stay here, Elias said. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the hangar bay. Val isn't going to send a cease and desist letter. He's going to glass this moon. As if on cue, the station shuddered. A kinetic impactor struck the far side of the facility, sending a shockwave through the floor plates that nearly knocked them off their feet. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the blood-red strobing of emergency klaxons. The shuttle, Silari gasped, recovering her balance instantly. We prepare cryo-transport. We take who we can. There's no time to detach the cryopods, Elias shouted over the roar of a secondary explosion. The docking clamps are fused. If we try to load them, we all die. Silari froze. She looked back toward the labs, pain etching deep lines into her face. We cannot leave them. They are safe in the vault, Elias yelled, dragging her forward. Val won't destroy the evidence if he thinks he can capture it. But he will destroy us. We have to draw his fire away. We are the targets. Silari. She looked at him, the logic of war warring with her heart. Logic won. She nodded, a sharp, jerky motion, and sprinted alongside him toward the launch bay. They strapped into a light reconnaissance craft, a sleek, needle-nosed vessel that had been sitting in the dark for centuries. Elias punched the ignition sequence. The ancient engines coughed, whined, and then roared to life with a blue-white fury. Hold on! Elias slammed the throttle forward. The ship shot out of the hangar just as a lance of plasma sliced through the station's control tower. They were in the void, immediately. The proximity sensors lit up like a Christmas tree. 3 Varelian interceptors peeled off from the main dreadnought, diving toward them. They are locking on, Silari announced from the co-pilot seat, her fingers flying across the weapons array. Shields are at 50%. We cannot outgun them. We're not fighting, Elias said, wrestling the stick as a warning laser scorched the hull. We're running. He pitched the nose down, aiming not for the stars, but for the planet below, specifically for the swirling toxic bands of the gas giant that the dead island's planet orbited. It was a desperate maneuver, a suicide dive into a gravity well that crushed ships like tin cans. Elias, Silari gripped the dash. That creates a gravity shear of 12 Gs. Better than a plasma bolt to the face. They hit the upper atmosphere of the gas giant at terminal velocity. The ship screamed, the hull heating to a blinding white. The G-force slammed them into their seats, crushing the air from their lungs. The viewports turned into a kaleidoscope of violent orange and bruised purple clouds. The pursuing interceptors pulled up, unable or unwilling to follow them into the storm. Elias fought the controls, leveling the craft out as they pierced the cloud layer. The turbulence was bone-shattering. The city, he wheezed, fighting the black spots in his vision. Where is the city? Coordinates locked, Silari gasped. Sector 7, the floating city of Erthos. It drifts in the methane currents. A massive shadow loomed out of the mist. It was a city suspended on anti-gravity pontoons the size of mountains, a sprawling, rusted metropolis of refineries and slums clinging to each other for warmth in the endless storm. It looked like a mechanical parasite floating in the gut of the giant. Coming in hot, Elias warned. Landing gear is jammed. Brace, Silari commanded. They skipped off the landing deck of a lower industrial district, metal shrieking against metal, sparks showering like fireworks in the fog. The ship spun, clipped a loading crane, and slammed into a heap of refuse containers before coming to a grinding, smoking halt. Silence returned, broken only by the hiss of cooling engines and the distant mournful horn of a gas refinery. Elias kicked the canopy open. The air that rushed in smelled of sulfur, processed fuel, and desperation. Welcome to Erthos, he coughed, unbuckling his harness. Try not to breathe too deeply. They moved through the city like ghosts. Sayalari had activated the stealth weave in her bodysuit, dimming her natural bioluminescence. But she still drew stares. In a place of miners, outcasts, and gas huffers, her height and grace marked her as an outsider. She wrapped herself in a heavy, grease-stained cloak Elias had stolen from a drying line, pulling the hood low over her silver hair. Erthos was a nightmare of verticality. Walkways of rusted grating suspended over 1,000-mile drops into the crushing depths of the gas giant. Neon lights flickered through the thick, yellow fog, advertising synthetic gin and cheap oxygen. The contact is in the lower spire, Sayalari murmured, checking a data pad she had salvaged from the ship. A hermit. The archives listed him as the Keeper. He was the chief geneticist of Project Harmony before he developed a conscience and fled. You think he's still alive? Elias asked, keeping his hand on the pistol concealed in his jacket. That project was centuries ago. Virelian lifespans are long, she reminded him, and guilt is a powerful preservative. They found the address in a sector that seemed to be actively falling apart. The door was a heavy blast shield, pitted with acid rain. Sayalari knocked, a specific rhythmic code. The slot slid open, a pair of mechanical eyes whirred, focusing on them. The storm brings strange drift, a voice rasped from a speaker. We carry the seed of the Nexus, Sayalari replied, the code phrase from the archives. The bolts threw back with a heavy clank. The door swung inward. The room beyond was a cluttered cavern of ancient tech. Servers hummed in the corners, cooled by liquid nitrogen tanks. Piles of data crystals lay on tables like jewels. In the center of the room sat a figure in a hovering medical chair. He was old, impossibly old. His lavender skin was wrinkled like a dried plum, and half of his face had been replaced with cybernetics. He looked at Sayalari, and his organic eyes widened. The blood of the sun, he wheezed. Princess Sayalari, you look exactly like your grandmother. You are the Keeper, Sayalari said, lowering her hood. I am Valerius, the old alien corrected. I was the Keeper once. Now I am just a man waiting for the oxygen to run out. He turned his gaze to Elias. The mechanical eye zoomed in, the aperture contracting. He didn't look at Elias's face. He looked at his hands, his posture, the way he stood. And you, Valerius whispered. A strange, terrifying smile stretched his withered lips. You are the iteration. My name is Elias, he said, stepping forward. And I want to know why a machine on the moon called me Project Harmony. Valerius laughed, a dry, hacking sound that turned into a cough. He tapped a command into his chair, and a holographic projector whirred to life. A double helix appeared in the air, one strand blue, the other red. They twisted, fought, and then merged into a seamless purple. We did not just splice genes in a lab, boy, Valerius said. That was an early failure. The bodies rejected the mind. The minds rejected the soul. He pointed a bony finger at Elias. So we changed the method. We introduced the modified sequence into the human population on the fringe worlds. A recessive trait, hidden, dormant. We let natural selection do the work for us. We waited for the generations to polish the rough edges. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. You bred us? Like cattle? Like roses, Valerius corrected gently. We wanted to create a peacekeeper, someone with the empathy of the Virelian and the resilience of the human. Someone who could bridge the gap between our species before the Great War consumed us all. I had a mother, Elias said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. I had a father. They weren't experiments. They were carriers, Valerius said brutally, unknowing vessels. But you, the sequence activated in you, the strength, the intuition, the ability to interface with our technology. The old man wheeled closer. Tell me, Elias, have you ever felt out of place among your own kind? Have you ever looked at the stars and felt a pull? A song you couldn't hear but knew was there? Have you ever survived things that should have killed you? Elias opened his mouth to deny it, but the words died in his throat. The crash. 6 days without food. The scanner. The way he had felt Sayalari's pain in the tunnel before he even touched her. I am not a weapon, Elias whispered. No, Valerius agreed. You are a lure. Sayalari stepped forward, her face hard. Explain. Valerius looked at the princess with pity. The project was not commissioned by the Peace Faction. Princess, it was commissioned by the Imperial Intelligence Directorate. They knew a day would come when a Varelian heir might stray, when the monarchy might need to be tested. He pointed between them. They built him to be the perfect mate for a royal, to resonate with your specific biofrequency, to bypass your cultural conditioning. Sayalari recoiled as if slapped. She looked at Elias. The horror in her eyes wasn't fear of him. It was a realization that unraveled her entire reality. They built you to tempt me, she whispered. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the servers. No, Elias said, reaching for her. Sayalari, that's a lie. What I feel, what we did, that was real. Was it? Sayalari stepped back, her back hitting a stack of mainframes. You heard him. You were designed to resonate with me. Your pheromones, your touch, your mind, it is all a trap, a biological lockpick for my heart. She looked down at her hands. I thought I was rebelling. I thought I was choosing my own path. But I was just walking into another cage my ancestors built. Sayalari, look at me! Elias shouted. He ignored the old man, ignored the guards he knew must be searching the city. He closed the distance, grabbing her shoulders. I don't care what he says, Elias said fiercely. I don't care about sequences or iterations. I know that when I was dying on that rock, you came back for me. Was that programming? Was that a recessive gene? Sayalari trembled under his hands. Tears spilled from her bioluminescent eyes. I do not know anymore. I know, Elias said. I choose you. Not because of a program, but because you are the only person in the universe who sees me. Not the peacekeeper, not the hybrid, just Elias. He looked deep into her eyes, his own human eyes burning with a desperate intensity. Do you still want me? Knowing what I am? Knowing I might be a lie? Do you still want me? Sayalari looked at him. She saw the pain in his face, the raw, terrified honesty. She looked at the man who had shielded her from plasma fire, who had held her in the dark, who had loved her in the zero gravity of a dying moon. She didn't answer with words. She grabbed the lapels of his stolen coat and yanked him down. She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was fierce, angry, and possessive. It was a rejection of history, of biology, of destiny. It was a declaration of war against the universe that tried to define them. I want you, she whispered against his mouth, her voice breaking. If you are a trap, then I will gladly be caught. I do not care if it is engineered. It feels like the only truth I have left. Valerius watched them from his chair, a flicker of something like hope in his mechanical eye. Remarkable, he muttered. The variable of choice. We never accounted for that. A heavy boom shook the building. Dust rained down from the ceiling. They are here, Valerius said calmly. The regent does not knock. Sayalari broke the kiss. Turning toward the door, the warrior was back. We need a way out. There is no way out, Valerius said. Look outside. They ran to the grime-streaked window. The sky above the floating city was gone. In its place was the underbelly of a super-dreadnought, the Hand of Judgment. It hung in the atmosphere, displacing the clouds, its gravity drive creating a localized storm. Hundreds of dropships were descending like swarms of locusts. A voice boomed across the entire city, amplified by speakers on the dreadnought. It was a voice Sayalari knew better than her own. People of Erthos. Regent Vale's voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifying. I do not seek your destruction. I seek only the return of stolen property. A hologram projected from the ship, appearing in the center of the city's district, 300 feet tall. It was Val, tall, regal, wearing the obsidian armor of the regent. Princess Sayalari, the hologram spoke directly to the sector they were hiding in. I know you are listening. You have broadcast your little secrets. You have embarrassed the throne, but I am a merciful ruler. Elias and Sayalari watched the projection, their hands gripped tight. I offer you a trade, Vale continued. Surrender the abomination. Give me the human hybrid, Elias Thorn. If you do this, I will pardon you. I will restore your title. I will allow you to return to the palace, and we will forget this madness ever happened. The hologram leaned forward, its eyes cold. Refuse, and I will incinerate this city. Every man, woman, and child in Erthos will burn for your stubbornness. 3 million lives, Sayalari. Weigh them against one primitive. Sayalari went rigid. 3 million lives. He's bluffing, Elias said, though he didn't sound convinced. He needs you alive. He does not need the city, Sayalari whispered. He will do it, to prove a point, to break me. She turned to Elias. The love in her eyes was suddenly masked by a wall of ice. It was the face of the Empress. I cannot let them die, she said. Sayalari, don't. Elias stepped back. We can fight. We can find another way. There is no other way, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She reached for her comms link. Valerius, she commanded the old man. Open the channel to the dreadnought. Sayalari! Elias lunged for her, but she was faster. She struck him, a precise, nerve-deadening blow to his solar plexus. Elias crumpled to the floor, gasping, paralyzed. He looked up at her, betrayal and confusion swimming in his eyes. Open it, she ordered. Valerius obeyed. The channel chirped open. Regent Val. Sayalari spoke into the comms, her voice steady and loud. This is Sayalari. I accept your terms. Excellent, Val's voice purred. A wise choice. Cousin. I am at the coordinates of the old spire, she said, staring down at Elias. Come and collect your prize. She cut the link. Elias tried to speak, tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. He could only watch her. Why? He mouthed. Sayalari knelt beside him. She brushed the hair from his forehead. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were unreadable. She leaned close to his ear. Because I love you, she whispered, so low that Valerius couldn't hear. And this is the only way to get you onto that ship. She stood up as the door was blasted off its hinges. Obsidian guards poured into the room. They grabbed Elias, hauling him up roughly. He couldn't fight. He hung in their grip, staring at her. Regent Val entered moments later. He stepped over the debris, his cape flowing behind him. He looked at Sayalari, then at Elias. Pathetic, Val sneered, looking at the helpless human. To think this thing caused so much trouble. He turned to Sayalari. You have done well to remember your duty, princess. The throne forgives. Take him, Sayalari said coldly, turning her back on Elias. "And get out of my sight." "Bring him to the brig," Val ordered his guards. "Prepare him for the public trial. We will make an example of him before we execute him." Elias was dragged out of the room. His last view was of Sayalari standing tall and alone in the wreckage of the hermit's lair, a silhouette of silver and lavender against the smog of the gas city. She didn't look back, as the heavy boots of the guards faded down the hallway. Sayalari let out a breath she had been holding for an eternity. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Valerius watched her from the shadows. "A dangerous gambit, princess. He thinks you betrayed him. He has to think that," Sayalari said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Val has to think that. It is the only way he will let his guard down." She turned to the old geneticist, her eyes burning with a terrifying fire. "Now," she said, "you have contacts in the fleet, old loyalists. Wake them up. I have a wedding to crash." The cell was not designed for confinement. It was designed for the deconstruction of the mind. There were no walls, only a spherical field of null entropy energy that suspended Elias in a void of absolute whiteness. There was no up, no down, no sound, and no passage of time. Periodically, the whiteness would turn to a screaming violet, and the neural agitators would fire. It felt like having his nervous system pulled out of his body through his pores, dipped in liquid nitrogen, and then shoved back in. Elias did not scream. He screamed the first 3 times. Now, he simply endured. He floated in the nothingness, his body broken, his mind fraying at the edges. Regent Val's interrogators wanted codes. They wanted the location of the other rebel cells. They wanted him to admit that he was a biological error, a mistake of nature. But Elias did not speak. He focused on a single point in the infinite white. He constructed a memory, brick by brick, to keep the madness at bay. He saw the dead island. He felt the heat of the volcanic rock. He smelled the ozone and crushed flowers. And most of all, he saw her eyes. Not the cold, imperious eyes of the princess who had betrayed him in the gas city, but the terrified, vulnerable nebula in the eyes of the woman who had held him in the zero-gravity core of the moon. "Because I love you." He replayed the whisper he had heard in Erthos, over and over. It was the anchor that kept him from drifting away. She had struck him. She had handed him over, but she had whispered that she loved him. It was a contradiction that his logical mind couldn't parse. So his heart held onto it instead. The field flickered. The whiteness collapsed, replaced by the harsh, sterile gray of a holding deck. Gravity returned with a sickening lurch, slamming him to the metal floor. 2 obsidian guards hauled him up. Elias couldn't stand. His legs were jelly. They dragged him, his boots scraping the deck plates. "The Regent is ready for you," one of the guards growled. They moved through the bowels of the Hand of Judgment. The ship was a floating city of war, vibrating with the hum of massive engines. They passed viewports showing the fleet, hundreds of dagger-shaped destroyers holding formation against the backdrop of the gas giant. They entered the Grand Hall. It was a cavernous space, the ceiling a transparent dome looking out into the stars. Thousands of Varelian officers, nobles, and fleet commanders stood in ranks, a sea of violet skin and black armor. Hovercams buzzed through the air, broadcasting the event to every system in the Empire. At the far end, on a dais of raised obsidian, sat the throne. Regent Val sat there, looking bored, and standing next to him, dressed in the ceremonial silver robes of a penitent, was Sayalari. She looked immaculate. Her face was a mask of serene indifference. She did not look at Elias as the guards threw him to the floor at the foot of the stairs. "Rise," Val commanded. His voice was amplified, booming through the hall. Elias forced his legs to work. He stood, swaying, bruised and bloody, a stark contrast to the pristine elegance of the court. He looked at Sayalari. She was staring at a point just above his head. "Here stands the corruption," Vale announced, gesturing to Elias with a gloved hand. "The mongrel breed, the proof that our ancestors' mercy was a mistake." Vale stood and walked down the stairs, circling Elias like a shark. "He corrupted the moon. He poisoned the mind of our princess. But the Empire is strong. The Empire corrects its errors." Val turned to Sayalari. "Princess, you have returned to the fold. You have accepted the mercy of the throne. Now, complete your penance." He pointed at Elias. "Denounce him. Tell the galaxy what he is. Tell them that the lies of the Peacekeeper Project are just that, lies. And then, execute him." A guard stepped forward, offering Sayalari a heavy ceremonial plasma pistol. Sayalari took the weapon. She weighed it in her hand. She walked down the stairs, her silver robes flowing like liquid mercury. She stopped 3 feet from Elias. Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes were hard. There was no warmth, no recognition. She raised the pistol, aiming it directly at his heart. The hall held its breath. "Do you have any final words, human?" Sayalari asked. Her voice was cold, clear, and loud enough for the microphones to catch. Elias looked at the gun. Then he looked at her. He saw the slight tension in her jaw. He saw the way her finger rested not on the trigger, but on the biometric safety release. "Just one," Elias rasped. His voice was broken but steady. "Sanctuary." It was the destination of the gate, Site Omega. A flicker of something ignited in Sayalari's eyes. A spark. "I denounce you," Sayalari said, her voice rising, ringing off the bulkheads. "I denounce you as a prisoner." She turned her head slightly, looking back at Vale. "And I declare that there are no prisoners on this ship," she shouted. "Only mutineers." She spun the pistol in her hand, not firing at Elias, but slamming the butt of the weapon into the control node on her own wrist gauntlet. Click. The sound was small, but the result was catastrophic. A high-frequency signal shrieked through the ship's internal grid. It wasn't a bomb. It was an override code, the backdoor access Elias had unwittingly given her access to when his genetic markers unlocked the Nexus. It was the master key to the fleet's security grid. Every containment cell on the ship unlocked, every slave collar deactivated. And the gravity plating in the Grand Hall reversed polarity. Chaos erupted. The nobles screamed as they were lifted off their feet, floating helplessly toward the ceiling. Val grabbed the arms of his throne, his magnetic boots locking him in place. Sayalari grabbed Elias by the collar of his shredded flight suit, anchoring him as she activated her own gravity boots. "You took your time," Elias yelled over the screaming of the crowd. "I had to make it dramatic," she yelled back. She shoved the plasma pistol into his hand. "Can you fight?" Elias checked the charge. Full. He grinned, the blood on his teeth making him look feral. "Try and stop me." "The fleet!" Val roared from the dais, pointing a trembling finger at them. "Kill them! Burn them!" But the fleet was busy, outside the dome, space lit up with fire. The broadcast from the moon had done its work. Half the destroyers in the formation had turned their guns on the flagship. The rebellion had not just been sparked, it was an inferno. Inside the hall, the Obsidian Guard activated their mag boots and charged. "To the throne," Sayalari commanded. They moved as one. It was a dance they had learned in the ruins of the island and perfected in the zero gravity of the moon. Elias fired, his aim true despite the torture, taking out a guard who was lining up a shot on Sayalari. Sayalari moved like a wraith, using her hard light gauntlets to deflect plasma bolts, closing the distance to strike with bone-shattering force. They fought up the stairs, back to back, a whirlwind of violet light and kinetic violence. They were outnumbered 10-1, but the chaos was their ally. The floating nobles blocked the guards' lines of sight. The reversing gravity threw aim off. Elias vaulted over a floating admiral, firing 2 shots into the chest of a heavy trooper. He landed beside Sailari. "Val is running!" Elias shouted. The regent had retreated through the blast doors behind the throne, sealing them shut. "He is going to the bridge," Sailari said. "He will try to initiate the Omega Protocol. He will detonate the ship's core to take the fleet with him." "Not if we get there first." Sailari placed her hands on the heavy blast doors. She didn't try to hack them. She poured every ounce of energy from her suit's reserves into her gauntlets. The metal groaned, glowed red, and then buckled. They burst onto the bridge. It was empty, save for the dead crewmen Val had executed to clear the room. The regent stood at the central tactical table, his hand hovering over a red interface key. He turned. He was no longer the bored aristocrat. He was a cornered beast, his eyes wide with madness. He drew a weapon from his belt, not a pistol, but an ancient curved energy blade that hummed with a dark, unstable crackle. "You cannot win," Val hissed. "I am the blood of the sun. I am the state." "You are a frightened little man," Sailari said, drawing a collapsible staff from her robes. She snapped it open, the ends igniting with white plasma. Val screamed and charged. He was fast, faster than any human. He closed the distance in a blur, the dark blade sweeping down to cleave Sailari in 2. She blocked, the impact sending a shockwave through the room that shattered the tactical displays. Elias fired, but Val deflected the bolts with a wave of his offhand, his personal shield flaring. "Primitive filth!" Val roared, kicking Elias in the chest. Elias flew backward, crashing into the navigation console. He gasped, feeling a rib crack. Val pressed the attack on Sailari. It was a duel of masters. Sparks flew as staff met swords. Sailari was skilled, but she was exhausted, and she had been playing the part of a prisoner for days without food or rest. Val was fresh, and his rage gave him strength. He feinted low, then struck high. The dark blade sliced through Sailari's defense, catching her across the abdomen. Sailari gasped, her eyes going wide. She stumbled back, clutching her side. Violet blood seeped through her silver fingers. "No!" Elias screamed. He didn't think so. He didn't use a weapon, he just reacted. The peacekeeper programming, the hybrid instinct Valerius had spoken of, surged to the surface. Elias leaped. He didn't aim for Val. He aimed for the ship itself. He slammed his hand onto the exposed circuitry of the smashed navigation console. Interface detected. Elias didn't ask for a door to open. He screamed a command into the machine language of the ship. Gravity. Maximum. Localized. He targeted the floor beneath Val's feet. The gravity plating under the regent surged to 500 times standard pull. Val froze. His eyes bulged. The sword fell from his hand, clattering to the deck as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He was pinned, crushed by the weight of his own existence. His armor began to buckle. "You," Val wheezed, forced to his knees, then to his chest. "What are you?" Elias stood over him, breathing hard, his hand still on the console. "I'm the bridge you burned." Sailari slumped against the tactical table, her face gray. "Elias, the core." Val, with his last ounce of strength, reached out a trembling hand toward the self-destruct key. He couldn't stand, but he could crawl. Elias drew the plasma pistol. He put the barrel to Val's head. "For the trinary worlds," Elias said softly. He pulled the trigger. The Regent collapsed. The crushing gravity field dissipated as Elias released the console. Silence fell on the bridge. "Silari!" Elias dropped the gun and ran to her. She had slid to the floor, a pool of violet blood spreading around her. Her staff lay extinguished by her side. Her eyes were dimming, the bioluminescence fading to a dull, flickering gray. "Elias," she whispered. Her voice was wet. "I've got you," Elias said, his hands pressing frantically against the wound. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? That's an order. Princess." "The ship," she gasped. "Taking fire. Shields failing." Elias looked up. The viewports showed the rebel fleet closing in, unaware that the regent was dead. The hand of judgment was burning. "We're leaving," Elias said. He scooped her up in his arms. She felt terrifyingly light. "Medical pod. Now." He ran. He ignored the pain in his ribs. He ignored the screaming alarms. He ran through the burning corridors of the dreadnought, kicking open doors, dodging falling debris. He carried her like she was the only thing in the universe that had mass. He reached the escape pod bay. It was chaos. Loyalist officers fighting each other for seats on the last transports. Elias didn't stop. He shoulder-checked a panicked admiral, knocking him aside, and threw himself and Sayalari into a single-occupancy pod. He placed her in the stasis cradle. Her eyes were closed, her chest was barely moving. "Don't you dare!" Elias sobbed, his hands flying across the launch controls. "Don't you dare leave me alone in this galaxy again!" He punched the launch button. The pod blasted away from the dying dreadnought, through the rear viewport. Elias watched as the hand of judgment finally succumbed. The reactor went critical. A sphere of silent, white light consumed the ship, expanding outward to vaporize the debris field. Elias didn't watch the explosion. He turned his chair to the cradle. The medical sensors were screaming. Critical failure. Trauma detected. Initiating emergency synthesis. The pod's automated systems went to work, injecting nanites, sealing the wound. But the vitals monitor was flatlining. "Silari!" Elias grabbed her hand. "Come back!" He pressed his forehead against hers. He didn't know if it was hybrid genetics or just desperate human prayer, but he focused everything he had, every memory of the island, every moment of warmth in the tunnel, every beat of his heart, and tried to push it into her. "Live, please, just live." Minutes stretched into hours. The pod drifted in the silence of the void, heading for the coordinates Elias had locked in. Then, a spike. A single jagged line on the monitor. Then another. A ragged breath shuddered through Sayalari's chest. Her eyelids fluttered. The gray skin flushed with a faint, returning lavender. The bioluminescence in her cheeks sparked, flickered, and then held a steady, dim glow. She opened her eyes. The nebula was faint, but it was there. She looked at the ceiling of the pod, then slowly turned her head to look at him. Elias was slumped against the side of the cradle, tears tracking lines through the soot on his face. "You," she whispered. Her voice was a ruin, barely audible. "Me." Elias choked out a laugh that sounded like a sob. "I told you, I'm persistent." Silari lifted her hand. It was shaking, but she managed to reach out and touch his face. Her fingers were warm. "I remember," she said softly. "In the darkness. I heard you calling." She coughed, wincing, but kept her eyes locked on his. "I found you when you were dying," she whispered, echoing the memory of the lava fields. "But you brought me to life." Elias kissed her palm. "We're even." She closed her eyes, a small smile touching her lips. "Where are we going?" Elias looked out the viewport. Ahead of them, hanging in the void like a forgotten jewel, was the planet, and on its surface, Visible even from orbit was the scar of the dead island. Home, Elias said. We're going home. The island was no longer dead. It had taken time, years. The terraforming technology Elias had salvaged from the Site Omega archives was old, but effective. The black volcanic rock was now carpeted in moss and hardy, violet scrub grass. The air was breathable, smelling of salt and new growth. The ruins of the ancient outpost had been sealed, the weapons dismantled. The entrance to the tunnel was now just a cave mouth overlooking the sea. Elias sat on the ridge, watching the sunset. It painted the sky in streaks of gold and purple, matching the flowers that now grew in the crevices of the obsidian. He heard footsteps behind him. Light, graceful steps that made no sound on the stones. Sayalari sat down beside him. She wore simple clothes, tunics woven from synthetic fibers they had fabricated. She carried no armor. Her skin glowed softly in the twilight, healthy and vibrant. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, his hand resting on the scar that ran across her abdomen, a reminder of the price they had paid. The transmitter picked up a signal, Sayalari said quietly. The New Republic Council. They want to offer us a seat. They say the galaxy needs the peacekeepers. Elias picked up a stone and tossed it over the cliff. It fell silently into the ocean below. Let them wait, Elias said. The galaxy is loud. I like the quiet. Sayalari smiled. She looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the hybrid children from the moon were awake, living in the gas city, rebuilding their own lives. Somewhere out there, the empire was crumbling, replaced by something new, something messy and chaotic and free. She looked at Elias. His hair was graying at the temples now. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He was human, and he was aging, and one day he would leave her. But not today. Today, they were just a man and a woman on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Do you regret it? She asked, as she sometimes did when the nights were long. The envoy, the crash, the war? Elias looked at her. He saw the alien princess who had saved him. He saw the warrior who had fought for him. He saw the wife who had built a life with him from ashes. No, Elias said. He kissed her forehead. I don't regret a damn thing. They sat there as the night fully claimed the sky, two specks of light on a healed world. She found a human man dying alone. But what they built together rewrote the stars.